So what's it like being a female expat living in Asia? Well, today I want to speak to someone who has been in Asia for nearly as long as I have been. This is Karen, originally from New Zealand. So Karen, how long have you actually been an expat?
About 34 years, I think, when you add it all up.
Right, and is it more than one country?
Yes, I started in Japan and I had 3 years in Japan, and then I had a period in Singapore. Then I went to Europe for a short time. And then after that, I came back to Thailand, and I've been in Thailand for 27, going on 28 years.
Wow, that is quite a long time in one country. Okay, so let's talk about initially why it was that you left the home country of New Zealand in the first place.
I think I was just interested in adventure. I mean, looking for things that were different to what was at home. I started, actually, maybe the roots are in your childhood, right? And you know or you don't know that at the time. But I learned Japanese at high school, and so I think I had an interest in Asia that evolved out of that. And I had traveled to Japan, just as a holiday trip or as a school trip. And so then when opportunity came up to work in Japan, I was probably more open up for it than others might have been. And I think there's just a natural curiosity that has really fueled me throughout all of this time. There's so many different things in every day that it's a beautiful exploration of things that are different to what you're used to.
So one of the things I talked about in one of the other videos is this idea that, expats are somehow like broken toys, or there's some reason that they don't settle at home. But I actually, for me personally, came to the conclusion that a lot of what drives people and women to become expats is exactly what you're talking about. This idea that there's something within us, maybe from our childhood, that is a drive to kind of keep curious, or just have things slightly off kilter, things that we want to, problems that we want to solve on a day-to-day basis. Would you say that's fair?
I think that if you have an open mind and you have curiosity, then I think it's natural to be looking at opportunities that are abroad. It's not to say that you can't quench that thirst at home, but it's just the daily difference, I think, that is always interesting and challenging. That little things just every day that you conduct in your life, somehow they stay with you, and you see them with fresh eyes every day. And I don't feel that you're necessarily broken. Of course, I wouldn't, I guess, given the length of time I've been away, but I love seeing that sort of thing, and I appreciate it and value it, and that's why I've been here so long.
Right. Okay. So back in the day when you were in Japan, I mean, 30 plus years ago, that must have been quite a different experience for a single Western woman in Japan.
It was a very different experience. I was working in a predominantly Japanese company, and one of their requirements for the women in their company was that you had to go to ikebana classes. And so once
is that flower arranging?
Japanese flower arranging. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So once a week I would toddle along to these Japanese flower arranging classes, and then I would have to bring back this arrangement, and it would have to go onto the reception in the company. And everybody had this great delight in saying, okay, here's this flower arrangement from the foreigner.
This foreign woman.
And I struggled with that a little bit. But, all of these things are learning things, and you just, you have to stay open. It's not a judgment on anything. It's just, it's just an experience that you're in at the time. But it was a very masculine environment. You had to travel 3 or 4 floors to find a toilet for a woman and things like that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that must have been
was the day
back in the day. And am I misunderstanding this? But in Japanese culture, I think there's also a sort of a thing that a single woman, should be aiming to get married, or if a woman is married in Japan and she's working, maybe she wants to focus on the family. Did you find any of that sort of thing in your role?
Actually, no, because I was married at that time, and in fact, my then husband had gone to Japan ahead of me. So I joined a few months or nearly a year after he had had gone and set up. So I think I probably ticked that box.
Okay. Well, lucky for you, I want to say. Lucky for you. Okay, so that was Japan, and then you were in Europe. And then you found yourself in Thailand, where you've been for what some would consider quite a serious length of time.
Sure.
And I know, because I know you, that you've been working for all of that time as well. So firstly, what was the move to Thailand about? Why did you end up in Thailand?
I came here initially. I was selecting at the time between Hong Kong and Thailand, and I was really interested in Hong Kong because of the access to China. But if you think back 30 years, it probably was too early to be going into China as an expat, and probably quite lucky that didn't come about.
Mm.
I think at the end of the day, as I was making the decision, when I look back now, it sort of horrifies me how little I knew about the choices I was making. But,
Right.
As it turned out, there were networks and connections, as it so often is when you're looking for new roles. And they made a difference to the employment opportunity. And on balance, that became Thailand. Yeah. So, and I think one of the things I had learned from Japan is when I left, I felt very much like the last day that you're leaving a foreign country is the day that you know most about that country, the day that you're best in a position to make a difference, the day that you have the most language, the day that you have the best network and connections. And I thought, having had 3 years in Japan, one of my lessons really was that's too short for such a foreign country.
Right.
Maybe if it was moving to Australia, you would say, well, it's similar and it's not that different. But I think when you go to a place like Japan, there's a depth and a complexity that deserves longer. And so one of the resolutions to myself as I came to Thailand was, don't think of this as a fixed term. Just open the doors and see where it goes. And 28 years later,
There you are. You still are.
But I think that was an important lesson.
Yeah. Okay, well that brings up some interesting things as well about about the lessons that we learn as we do move around. I mean, I've moved around like you a lot, and I think that it kind of, every time you move, it becomes more of an education as to how you're going to settle in. Like you said before about how little you actually knew the first time. I think that's true for all of us, right? And it doesn't matter if you're doing that in 2025 or some other time. When I see people sort of asking questions about, on the women's forums of Thailand, and they say, can I do this? Can I do this? And I think, well, obviously you can, like you should just ask somebody, but they don't know. It's their first time.
I think there's a stage where you're naively optimistic.
Yeah.
You just assume you can do everything, and that's, in your early 30s or your late 20s.
Yeah.
And there's a more conservative stage, right? At 55 or 60, you know enough to know the things that are important to you, and you want to make sure that you can do them.
You set those in place. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go back a little bit. When your family heard that you were going to these places, and there was a possibility that they didn't know when you were coming back, what was their reaction?
I think they've always been really supportive.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I guess, a big deal for parents to have their kids leaving and going abroad. And I'm sure it's no less traumatic now than it was, but at least nowadays you have, great communications and you can keep in touch.
That's true.
And I think that one thing that has evolved over the time I've been away is, regular Skype and Teams calls or Facebook calls or whatever. In fact, the communication has improved over time. It's not something that has lessened. And I'm fortunate to have both of my parents still healthy and fit. And so we're in frequent communication, and it's a blessing now to be not writing aerograms.
Yeah, right, and sending postcards. Yeah, I used to send postcards.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, make that phone call on the Sunday and hear the little pips going and thinking, oh my God, this is costing a fortune, what's going on? Yeah. So, yes, I think you're right. I think communication has improved to the point now. I mean, video calls cost nothing. Once upon a time, that was the realm of fantasy. So I think that sort of really helps. All right. So the family was supportive, and you stayed away. Now, I want to talk to you about also, as a female expat, what did you feel that in terms of information for women was lacking for you back in those early days? Was it different? You mentioned being in a male environment in Japan, but even when you were in Thailand, did you think there was more support for male expats or female expats?
I mean, I think there was almost, well, I guess the quick judgment is to say there's almost no support for anybody.
Right.
But perhaps it's not entirely true. But I do remember some of my early forays, networking, being very ambitious and going into things like chambers of commerce, and they were extremely male-dominated environments, and there was just a lot of drinking
Right.
and not so much fun. But in Thailand in particular, there was, in those early days, a Australian-New Zealand women's group that was in fact very, very active, and they published what was in those days the Bible to life in particularly Bangkok, but a little bit of the provinces, or maybe Chiang Mai as well. And of course it was a book because there wasn't the online world, but it was 1.5 inches thick, and they republished it every year or other year. It included restaurant recommendations, school recommendations, moving companies, tailors, home help recommendations, driver recommendations, all sorts of things. And there was just this army of women who put that together and published every year, and it was distributed through bookstores and things like that. And that was, I think, the thing that took the role of Facebook Messenger groups and things nowadays.
That is interesting, because when I was in Malaysia, there was something very similar called MANZA, which was the Malaysian Australian New Zealand Association, which I became heavily involved in. But also there were these things back in the day called link ladies, and that was a British kind of thing, British having been in Malaya for some time. And what these link ladies did was, if you were coming into a town, or even into Kuala Lumpur, somebody would find out through the sort of expat network, and they would link you up with that, exactly that, have a morning tea, drag you along and say, okay, here's the hospital, this is the supermarket, this is the tailor, yes, all of that sort of stuff. And it was absolutely vital, especially in my case, where I was also trailing young kids at that point, and I was the trailing spouse. So having that sort of connection, knowing someone that I could call and say, in a panic, like, oh my God, what is this lizard doing in my kitchen, was just an absolute lifesaver. So that sort of Bible that you talk about is really vital. Do you not think, though, and this is my experience anyway, that women, being the sort of communicators that we are, tend to be quite good at that sort of thing? If there is someone new in the sisterhood, in the neighbourhood, that they are kind of quite supportive. I often say on this channel that that if people are worried about things, just ask another expat woman, because they'll support you. Somebody will help.
I think there's a lot of support. But I also think there's a bit of a difference in your ability to access the support from being a working person and a person that has more flexibility with their time. And, a lot of things, networking things, morning teas, fundraising things,
are
they happen during the day. So you want to be part of it, and nowadays you're part of the group, you're connected on Facebook or whatever, but you're not necessarily able to be there.
And now both you and I work, so I think that could be said even of now, right? There's a lot of things available to us, but it does, fantastic yoga sessions that you'd love to go and do, but they start at 5, and you're working till 6. So that sort of thing. Okay, I take that. I think that's a really valid point, actually, that Karen brings up. Okay, let's talk about another thing that is unique to you. So along the way, you'd been here for a while, and you actually, I assume at this stage, you were no longer married in Thailand. I'm just going to make that assumption there. Would that be true?
That's a fair
Okay, all right. And so you're somebody, and I have talked again on the channel about this, the idea of dating in Thailand and what that's like for anybody. And I sort of claim as an expatriate woman that if you're working in the city, I think, or working in Bangkok, or you're working somewhere else, any of the big cities in whether it be Hong Kong or Singapore or Kuala Lumpur, you're in a different kind of pool. There's lots of people who are professional people like you. You're meeting all of these people, and you will find someone to date. But in other places, in smaller town and provinces, let's say Chiang Mai or any of the other sort of smaller places, the dating pool might be a bit different. But you ended up in a relationship with a local person, with a Thai. So tell me. Not the grim details of that. I don't need to know the grim details of that. But tell me how that was that a surprise to you?
Yeah, I guess it was. I didn't have expectations sort of one way or another, or certainly not a requirement or a tick list or anything like that. It was a surprise, but life unfolds.
Oh yeah, no judgment or anything like that. It's just sort of one of those things, because relatively speaking, in terms of dating, when we talk about that from an expat point of view, there's a lot of emphasis on expatriate males meeting ladies of that country or men of that country and getting involved in a relationship. The reverse is not as common. I think that that's fair to say. Even in Hong Kong, I've got a lot of friends from Hong Kong who Western women who married Chinese guys, professional guys, blah, 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 no particular language issues because Hong Kong is an English-speaking place. And so, but less so, far less so than what is considered to be the norm. Would you agree that that's true?
I think at the beginning, it was like remarkable. If we would go down the street, people would like look twice, three times. But I think in later stages, and particularly in Bangkok, it's really not that remarkable. I mean, Bangkok is a very
cosmopolitan,
mixed,
isn't it?
environment, and I think that there wasn't a great deal of, it evolved, and I think today there's not really a great deal of judgment around that. But yeah, and I think in Bangkok, it is just a more, again, some of the smaller towns, they're retirement towns, and so it's a different thing. But in Bangkok, it's more of a professional environment, and there are both foreign men and Thai men, or whichever gender you want, people of all types who are in such a big city, with 18 million people. There's going to be somebody who suits the thing that you're
everybody.
interested in.
And I think that is really true. And so for women who are single women who are looking for a partnership, I definitely think that if you're in the city, it's a totally different game. I think as you said, in retirement towns or smaller places, the pool is just literally physically smaller. There's just less opportunities because there's less people who you can maybe reach out to, or it's just a physical thing. And it's not necessarily to do with race or culture, or even, I'm going to even say, language. It's just that there's a much smaller pool. But I did mention before in a video that I did about dating is that the one statistic that I see that kind of upends that is actually in the LGBTQ community, which is interesting for me. For women who are lesbians or that kind of thing. There's actually, the pool there is significantly, it's somehow more charged, which is great, but I find that interesting. It's just a sort of a different take on it. I don't know really what to say, but no judgment. It's not.
Every country has its own characteristic.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's all terribly interesting. Now, if you were to offer some advice to a woman, either a working woman or someone, someone of let's say over the age of 45 who was thinking about moving to a country like Thailand, are there things that you would like to say to them, to pass on some knowledge or some wisdom that you have, things that they need to be aware of or think about?
I think that Asia in general has a different way of making decisions than the West. And I think that this is something that you maybe hear and you don't perhaps realize, or you don't necessarily internalize until you're really faced with it. And I think that first thing is that it's a collective society. And so a lot of decisions are not what I want or what you want. It's, what do I think that person would want, or what do I think that person would want, or what would my mother want, or what would my grandmother want, and how does it look to the outside? All of these things come into decision making. And so the mode that we might be used to, which is this is my preference and this is what I'd like to do, is really not the primary frame of reference for making a decision on where to go to lunch or what to do in the weekend or how to allocate your time. And so you run up against this, and you kind of, it's unspoken because it's their primary culture, right? So they don't necessarily realize that it's different to you. But you run up against these things. Why are we doing this? I don't want to do that. It's not very efficient. It's not. And then you realize they're doing it because they're taking into consideration the thought, the feeling, the look of the way that something appears to or is related to somebody else. And it's a very sort of unspoken thing, but it's important, and it's, I think, common in a lot of in most of Southeast Asia. And I think that anyone it applies in the workplace as well. It applies to getting things done. It applies to asking somebody for a favor or expecting them just to do their job. And they have these relationships to a boss or to a senior person in the company that mean that they don't do the things necessarily that you would expect. So this is a context in the workplace and in personal relationships. I think it's really important to be aware of this, the nature of face and the context of the community that you're in. These things, I think, make are very, very different, and they're very not necessarily obvious at the outset. And it's worth really being aware of this, because it impacts a lot about how you make decisions and how you get things done in the country.
Would you say that is also in relationship to, and it certainly happens in Thailand, but it has happened in other countries that I've lived in as well, and you mentioned face there, of this idea of getting frustrated and irritated when things don't go the way that you expect them to go, and you can't quite see why, and often the reaction is embarrassment, a giggle, sort of a backing away from this confrontation that's happening. And people, I think this is my opinion, is that a lot of people, including myself, at a younger time, where I used to think, well, this is just ignorance, this is just, why aren't we doing it this way? It's obviously logical. Not taking that into consideration is that there's so much more going on behind the scenes that I needed to be sensitive to, that we need to be sensitive to. You mentioned about elders, right? This idea of making sure that the collective, that the group, that the team, that the family, that everybody is comfortable with what's happening, not just point A and point B. I think that can be really tough to deal with.
Harmony is really valued. So preserving harmony in relationships, it means subverting yourself quite often, doing things for other people that you don't necessarily want to do. And I think that when you might get frustrated, people are regarded as being mature or being well behaved when they don't exhibit that frustration. And so the Westerner is often going to sort of escalating behaviors and louder and more
aggressive and
stronger gestures and things like that. Whereas an Asian approach is often to say, okay, how can we look at this differently? How can we accommodate what they want? What's their point of view? And they start from all of that sort of 360. And often that manifests as something that takes a long time, because people are busy thinking about all of those 360 angles. Whereas we would be going,
where's the solution? Where's the solution?
Let's move forward. That's another thing. I mean, deciding where to go to lunch can take 3/4 of an hour of conversation, because you should want to accommodate everybody's intentions and goals and whatever with the lunch. But harmony, I think, is a really prized value, and often it conflicts with how Westerners think about things.
Perceive things, All right, Karen, final question. If you went back now and you wanted to tell yourself something at the beginning of your journey, what is something that you would say, okay, whether it's simply, pack a bag, we're going for a long time, is there something that you would go back and tell 34-year-old ago Karen about what your life is going to look like until this point?
Hard to know. But I think understanding this way of making decisions would be something that I definitely would have liked to have known more about early. I think knowing how organizations work and understanding power structure in organizations is important. The importance of mentors having good mentors in organizations has really made a difference to my ability to work. That it's not a new thing that's known in all cultures, but it's important here as well. And I think that as a foreigner coming into a company, they're not necessarily looking for you to trample and lead. They want you to integrate and to show that you can build relationships and that you can make connections with people and motivate people to make change. I think, just enjoy. Don't forget to enjoy the place that you're in. You can get too much focused on work and not enough time. Anywhere in Asia, you're within an hour of many, many interesting places, and I just think it's really worthwhile exploring all of the time and using the opportunities that are in your hand.
Now, thank you. Now, I forgot to mention that you speak pretty reasonable Thai. So how long did that take?
I'd say it's forever. It's a journey. I mean, I had a great teacher at the beginning. I was not a particularly good student. I would take classes. I would quit classes. And I was fortunate in my working environment. It was very, very Thai, and so I had to learn and sort of just dive in the deep end. But
ongoing.
It's an ongoing journey.
Any regrets?
in terms of learning Thai, I wish that I had learned to read and write
at the beginning,
not just learn to speak, because it's very hard to go back and pick that up.
Sure. No, any regrets about the first move, about the first step on that plane?
Oh, no.
None at all?
None at all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
The lovely Karen, my first interview for the channel, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, and I look forward to the next 34 years of your company.
Thank you.